Hello, folks. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. I'm your host, Roy Bensby. This podcast is an opportunity for me to speak with some of the most interesting people I know, either with amazing talents or achievements, or unbelievable life stories, or just invaluable insights into areas which they have dedicated their lives to studying. I sit down with these amazing individuals from across the planet, and I try to ask them questions that will hopefully help you, the listener, extract something valuable or learn something new or just hopefully get inspired by. You can find all the episodes for the podcast on all the major podcasting platforms such as iTunes, Spotify, Google, Overcast, iHeartRadio, literally all of them. It's there. If you love the show, if it adds value to your life in any way, shape, or form, please leave reviews on iTunes. It really helps grow the podcast. It puts it up there so more people can see it. You can also find all the episodes and everything else, all the information that's updated regularly on the website, which is roybensv.com, ROYBENTZVI.com, and you can sign up for updates as well. I've also been updating the YouTube channel, so I've been uploading all the old episodes pretty much on a daily basis, so you can find it there. And in the future, I hope to make video podcasting as well. If that's something you guys want to check out and are interested in, please shoot me email. I'd love to hear from you. And also make sure to check out the social media platforms, Instagram and Twitter. I post there daily. And lastly, if you guys want to support and help grow the podcast, please go to Buy Me a Coffee or Anchor or Patreon. It is an endeavor to grow this podcast and make it what it should be. And it takes a village. So I want to thank each and every one of you for listening. I see that there are literally listeners from all over the world in each and every country. So thank you to everyone, and on to the show. All right, folks, today on the podcast, I have Sarah McLaughlin. Nope, not that Sarah. This Sarah is the Senior Program Officer at FIRE, which stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. What this group is essentially advocating for is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, religious liberty on campuses, which should be true for everyone, faculty, students, any other members that are related to institutional education. And right now, freedom of speech it's a very hot button topic. I feel like especially on campuses, people are not allowed to go outside, color outside the lines of what is currently accepted. So if they say anything that is remotely outrageous or controversial, they get banned from speaking at those institutions. They get fired. It's become even violent at times, if you take into a few stories like Evergreen and many, many other stories that probably don't even make the news. So freedom of speech right now is kind of under fire, you could say. Everyone is offended by something that the other party says, regardless if it's social or political. It's just not the best time for free speech, especially on campuses and in the US right now, which should be a bastion of free speech. Everyone came here because they were prosecuted or persecuted in their countries for their religious beliefs, for their political ideologies. So this should be the place where everyone can express themselves freely without fear of any sort of retribution. And we are losing that a little bit. So I'm very happy that Sarah and many, many others are fighting this battle. This was a really fun conversation. Obviously, we talked a lot about free speech. We talked about foreign governments infiltrating our educational institutions and what their gains could be from this. We talked about the Confucius Institute, Qatar, and some of our educational institutions being overseas, and what are some of the ethical guidelines that people need to follow in those countries. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I had a blast talking to Sarah. She knows a whole lot about this. She's been covering this topic for a very long time. And yeah, we really got into some nitty-gritty details, and I think you guys are going to love this episode. So without further ado, Here is Sarah McLaughlin. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Could be worse, I guess.
It's a good way to look at it. It's a positive outlook. It always could be worse.
That's been my answer for anybody asking me the past 8 months or so. I know that it could be worse. So.
Yeah. I like it because it's positive, because if you think most people, they answer, it could be better. And that's kind of like a pessimistic way of looking at things, because you're like saying, it's not great, but could be worse means like, it's pretty good.
I won't deny that it could be better, but it could also be worse.
Well, that's very neutral then. Yeah. It's just realistic.
I'm middle of the road on it.
Yeah. By the way, I love your Twitter background, because when I was Googling you, that's literally what I came up against. And I was like, no, this is not the person I'm looking for, Google. Just help me out. Is it pronounced? It's not pronounced McLaughlin, right? It's McLaughlin?
It's McLaughlin. Yeah,
it is.
It's exactly the same. Yeah, just the other day.
Spelled differently.
Yeah, it's spelled a little differently.
Okay.
Just the other day, I had somebody tweet at me, and he was like, "Hey, can you settle an argument between me and my wife? I'm convinced that you're the singer." And she says, "You're absolutely not." And I was like, "Your wife wins this one."
Yeah, buy her a bottle of wine. I mean, there's a huge age difference also. She's at least, double your age or something?
I think she actually became famous like right around when I was born.
Yeah. She's got to be 50s. I would
yeah, I'm an early 90s baby. I think early 90s is when she hit it big. So yeah, I think she's probably in her 50s.
I miss the 90s. The 90s was a beautiful era. Really, some of the best music ever made, and this is one of the hills I'll die on, was the 90s.
I don't know. I don't know if I have enough, strong conscious memories of the 90s to be making any claims.
And just trust what I'm saying then. Just take my word
right,
for it.
Take your word for it.
Yeah. Take this person you only met a few minutes ago and just trust what they say. I feel like that's always a good good way.
I just met this guy on the internet 3 minutes ago, but I think he's right about everything.
Yeah, he's got a trustworthy face. He should definitely listen to what he has to say. So Sarah, you work with FIRE, and its foundation stands for Individual Rights in Education. Can you maybe explain a little bit more in detail what you do there, what the organization stands for?
Sure. So FIRE started around 20 years ago. I think it's 21 years this year. And so we defend the First Amendment and freedom of expression on college campuses. So it's, we're nonpartisan, we're nonprofit. So we will defend, any speech as long as it's protected by the First Amendment. So we primarily help students and faculty who are dealing with censorship in some way, professor writes a tweet that gets picked up by the media. They get in trouble. That one happens a lot.
Yeah, more and more frequently.
Yeah. A student group wants to host an event, but they're told they're not allowed to because they're controversial, things like that. We have defended every view under the sun. We've helped, people protesting something and people supporting it, sometimes in the same week. It's a very interesting job. And we have kind of a collection of, very different viewpoints and perspectives in the office. And I think it helps us to, come at it from the point of view where we can, be nonpartisan, and we can, we can always find a way to defend the First Amendment. And I think that's great. And it's something that's kind of hard to do right now.
Yeah.
It's a little bit hard to get people to see the principled stand on free expression right now. So I'm proud to be doing that work.
It's free speech as long as you agree with me.
Yeah.
You should definitely be able to say what you want as long as I agree. If I don't agree, then I'm going to try and shut you down. That's kind of what the landscape is right now.
Yeah, it is, and it's it's incredible how prevalent that is, across the political spectrum. There are a lot of people who feel that way.
Yeah.
So it's a big problem to overcome. But we're working on it, and we help a lot of students and faculty who are struggling with censorship issues.
Is it more students or more faculty? Like, what's the full gamut or scope that of issues that people kind of reach out to the organization for? Like, at what point do people say, like, okay, I need to reach out to fire?
A lot of times people will just reach out to us when, they think they might be, like, hey, I posted something controversial. People are mad at me. I think they're going to reach out to the school and try to get me fired. Can you help me out? And, sometimes we hear from people after they've already been fired or kicked out of school. And we help them. And then we also kind of try to take a proactive approach. So, like, for example, we have a policy reform team that speaks to schools and administrators, and they say, you have these policies that are in violation of the First Amendment. So here's what you can do to fix them so they won't be a threat to students' rights. And just to make it a little clearer, so public universities in the United States are bound by the First Amendment, so they can't just censor whatever they want. Yeah. And private universities are not bound by the First Amendment, so they don't have a legal obligation not to censor speech. Really? But a lot of them do have certain handbook commitments, written policies that make pretty strong promises for free expression. So there's at least a moral argument and often a contractual argument, like, hey, you can't make these promises and then just quit on them when it gets a little tough. So yeah, with public universities, the First Amendment, private universities, 9 times out of 10, they will have made a promise to free expression.
But even in a private university, it's not like a employee of a company that represents the company, and I could be wrong about this, but if I express a view that's unpopular on social media, why am I being held accountable by the university if I'm a student? Like, I'm still a private citizen. I can say what I want. This isn't a company that hires me. Is that not a problem? It's just for faculty, or it's for students as well?
So I think, students and faculty, I think they tend to have slightly different issues there because, with students, people will just say, like, you shouldn't be a member of the community if, you say things that we don't like. And with faculty, sometimes schools will try to make the argument, like, you're representing our university, so you can't say anything that might make us look bad. One thing I can say about colleges is that, they are businesses to a certain extent, and they are very conscious of bad press, and they don't want bad press. So they sometimes tend to lash out at the people who think are giving them bad press, which, can be a controversial faculty member who, goes on Fox News or CNN and says something that gets people mad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Evergreen was a good example of Professor Weinstein, and he didn't bend to the mob's will, and he got fired, essentially, right?
So we've had quite a number of cases where, where faculty, say things that people don't understand why, it's so controversial, and it can be sort of tough to, get at the issue of explaining to people, why this is happening in the first place.
Yeah.
But we hear from a lot of faculty who, they don't know what to do, and they're afraid because it's like their livelihood. It's
Yeah,
scary
definitely.
to lose a job, especially it's not just easy to find another job as a faculty member. It's not the simplest thing in the world to just get a new job at a campus.
Especially if you've been branded as some, I don't know, righty that has these extreme ideas about XYZ.
Yeah, it can be, I think, especially, we're all seeing, how scary it is right now, just the idea of losing your job right now, especially during a pandemic. And there are faculty who are, terrified of that happening to them, especially at a time when the job market is pretty scary.
Yeah. Are you seeing it more from the left or from the right?
We get that question a lot, and it's really incredible how prevalent it is everywhere. It's not, an issue from the left or an issue from the right. It's an issue from everywhere. Because I think, fundamentally, people, I don't think it's a specific political, you know, inclination that leads people to want to censor. I think it's kind of just human nature,
Hmm.
that people don't want others to say things that they find deeply offensive.
Yeah.
So, and we see it, you know, you can pick any, political party and find an instance of them trying to censor speech that they find deeply offensive, whether it's, anti-police comments or anti-America comments or something like that. Like it really is not just, one party or one political viewpoint. It's pretty widespread, which makes it a harder job. I think we're suited for it because we're not coming at this, saying we want to defend this political viewpoint or that political viewpoint. We will, if it's protected by the First Amendment, we'll defend it. And I think that kind of makes it a lot easier, and it removes a lot of the, do we like this speech? Do we want to defend this person? That's not something we have to weigh because it doesn't matter. What matters is whether or not it's, protected. And it's kind of a simpler question that way.
Yeah. The problem is what is offensive has become so skewed that everything's offensive. It's just everything is offensive right now. And I don't know how you're just not bombarded by people 24/7 saying that someone, I read this thing, and I hope this is real. I didn't fact check this or anything, but a woman took a man to court because he winked at her in England.
I
She
have
felt like
not
he
seen
was,
that story, so I don't want to comment.
yeah. And again, like I didn't fact check this. Like, don't email me. I'm just saying that I read this, and I could see that happening. Like we're living in such sensitive times, and as far as male female interaction, I feel like a lot of it is happening through a mediator, which is Tinder or Bumble or all these other apps that are used for dating. It's like the rejection part, or the gathering that confidence to go talk to the other sex and try to ask them on a date, or you spark up a conversation. I feel like that happens less and less, and that's what we had to do back in the day. Now it seems like that doesn't happen, and it almost seems like when there are these small interactions, it's like, oh, you're invading my space, or oh, I feel threatened, or whatever that is.
I think, on the question of feeling like everything's offensive, I think it's even harder right now because we're spending so much time online, and we're pretty much conducting conversations in a way where it's very easy for something to be amplified among a
Hmm.
large group of people, and like all we're doing is staring at the internet, pretty much.
It is.
So I think offensive things that online um, it can kind of just be what we're focusing on because we're distracted and we're on the internet, and yeah, I'm trying to log off more personally for my
It's
mental health.
it's hard though, right? Especially
It is.
nowadays. It just seems like, yeah, we can't. It almost seems like we can't. Like you have to be a renegade of sorts for you to completely disconnect from social media, because regardless of what you do, it's a place where you can build your brand, right? If you get a decent following, it doesn't matter if you want to market a book later in life, if you want to get hired, if whatever it is, it helps if you have a good social media following. And to just disconnect and just say like, oh, I don't want 10,000 followers or 50 or whatever it is that you have, and say like, no, that's extremely difficult. It's also a very addictive drug to
Yeah, it
get
is.
those likes and to get that feedback, and people telling you, oh, right, you're so smart. Like, yeah, I love what you're saying. Not that people tell me that, but I can assume that if it is an addictive drug.
I think with me with Twitter, I've sort of built a group of friends on there who mostly just make fun of me, and I love that. I respect it. So for me, it's
You have
mostly
a decent
people
following.
lovingly mocking me.
Yeah. And that's what you want, right? You want I feel like there's something about the teasing and the mocking in a friendly way.
Yeah.
It builds character. Like you don't want people just completely like demolishing you, but in a friendly way, I think it
Somewhere in
builds
between.
character. So I mean, if we're on the subject of Twitter, I have to ask, what do you think of Twitter censoring our dear leader?
So I think uh, there's there's a lot of misinformation going on about it because I think a lot of people don't understand that it's not a First Amendment issue in the first place. A lot of people think, he's being censored. How can you do that? There's a First Amendment, and the First Amendment, only applies to the government.
Yeah.
I honestly have not been paying that much attention to it because I've been trying to remove myself from Twitter the past couple of weeks
Okay.
because it's been, a little horrible. I think that what's most important is for platforms to have very public and transparent policies that they stick to. And I think people are asking valid questions about, you're removing Trump, but what about the other government leaders who are saying really troubling things? They're
Khomeini.
allowed to keep accounts, and so I think it would be wise for Twitter to come at those questions more head on and more directly and say, this is why we're letting these leaders stay. This is why this one can't stay. That's what I would like because I think it's, for example, I think Chinese embassy account tweeted something about a week or so ago about, pretty much it was about how Uyghur women are so much happier now that they're having less children, and it was pretty disturbing because they're having less children because some of them are being forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, and so that tweet was up for a few days, and people were asking, why is this up, but why is Trump's account taken down? And eventually they did take down that tweet, but it was I think they hadn't really planned out a policy that would be global, that would apply to leaders. And so I think what's most important is having something transparent, so people understand why one leader is taken down, why another isn't, because otherwise it's just going to look like bias, or it's going to look like an ill-formed policy.
Yeah. And that's the problem. I don't see objectivity. Like you said, Chinese government, there's Khomeini, right? The spiritual leader in Iran. He's been advocating for the eradication of Israel for many, many years openly. And all those tweets are still up. And people, they'll post, hey, Jack, delete this account and it's up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of even Ron Paul, I don't know if this was Facebook or Twitter, but they discontinued his account and they didn't really give too much explanation. So it just seems like there's censorship because big tech is, it's very left, it's very progressive, very liberal. It just seems like there is more censorship via those platforms for people who are on the right. And if you do not oppose, if you have a differing or opposing opinion, trans rights, all those different things, you get shut down very, very quickly. And I know they can do it because obviously it's a private company. I think it's a question of should they do it, and should they be more like a public utility like the phone company, or is it a private company and they can just decide based on their political affiliations who and what should talk?
Yeah, I think we're kind of in need of a much broader conversation about what we actually want from these platforms, because I think there is a lot of censorship that happens on Facebook and Twitter that I think also gets less attention. Like there are things you might be surprised. Like there are many people who have had their accounts removed on Facebook for saying things like men are trash as like a jokey comment
Really?
against men. Yeah, like there's accounts of people who you'll get put in Facebook jail, as they call it, for like 30 days for that phrase if somebody reports it. And I think the fundamental issue is that content moderation is really difficult, and when you have that many posts coming in, it's not it's hard to come up with a principled way to, be taking things down that violate policies and not be, just taking down anything that anybody reports. So I think, we would benefit from just a lot more discussion about what's taken down, and how it's done, because I don't think we're ever actually going to have a solution we want about it,
No.
because I think it's such a difficult problem that I'm not sure, it's something that can be, easily addressed in the way people want it to be.
No, I mean, there's so much nuance, and the goalpost keeps moving all the time. Also, it's like, what is offensive now, was humor 20 years ago. And because it keeps moving, and it's not updating anyone. It's not like telling us, okay, like in 2020, this is what is offensive, and you can't joke about this anymore. It just keeps moving. And I think it's like, I keep thinking, like, sometimes I think about this. I'm like, my dad, who's 60, what is he, 66? Like, and he lives in another country. If I were to tell him some of the things that are happening, like with the younger generation, what is offensive and what is, like, he wouldn't have the slightest idea. It's not something that interests him. And, he could just speak his mind about certain issues, which might not be. And again, I'm talking about the US. Like, so I'm originally from Israel. Um, Different set of rules for a lot of different things, right? Here, like, just socially, what is acceptable is a little bit different. Or sorry, not acceptable is a little bit different. And for someone who's older generation, there's just no way they can keep up with it. And I think that's why they keep getting, a lot of people get in trouble when they're older. As they go online and they'll say certain things, and there's just no way for them to know what was, that 20 minutes ago that stopped being acceptable.
Well, I think, it goes back to why, transparency is important. Like, if a platform is going to be taking things down, it's good for people to know that. So, if they can decide if that's the kind of platform they want to use, and, they can be aware that, they might have access revoked if they say, whatever is on, a company's ban list. It's a complicated issue, and I'm trying to read and learn more about it. But I think the more I learn about it, the more difficult it is as an issue.
Yeah.
It's I don't envy anybody making these policies.
No, it's difficult. I'm sure they have good intentions. I don't think they're just like sitting there all plotting, like, ooh, we're gonna do this and that. I think people have good intentions. But it's difficult. It's hundreds of millions or billions of people putting out content all the time.
And you have, how many different countries with how many different legal systems that have very different demands about what content must be left up, what content must be taken down. Obviously, as an advocate for free expression, I want platforms to, tend toward, to find ways to better protect, free expression and, have people speaking freely. But content moderation is a tough one, and
Yeah.
I think people would benefit from like reading about how difficult it is, because the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, I'm glad I don't do that.
I'm glad I have my job.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to play devil's advocate, why is free speech and expression so important? I mean, maybe free speech and expression is only good for the West and other parts of the world, um, where they are content with the status quo. I mean, maybe their culture or religion is content with how things are right now, and they don't want the U.S. and the West telling them, meddling in their daily lives, telling them how they should live. What would be the kind of counter argument to that?
Honestly, I think the pandemic has kind of given us a perfect example of why free expression matters. There was a lot of censorship going on in China early. I guess it was December and January, December 2019, January 2020, of whistleblowers, of doctors, of journalists who were saying, I think there's something going on. I think there's a new flu that's going around, and they were threatened. They were put in prison. They were silence. They were said, you're picking quarrels. You can't say this. You're causing trouble. And, that probably we could have bought the world some more time dealing with the pandemic if there hadn't been a cover up of it and censorship of it for, weeks and weeks. So I think that's probably a pretty good example of, how important it is for people to be able to speak freely. And it's interesting. I think it's a good example of how people sometimes look at censorship and they think that's hundreds of miles away, thousands of miles away. That doesn't affect me. And actually, it can affect you. The free flow of information does matter. As we learned.
It would have been nice to get a little heads up from China. It would have been nice.
It doesn't excuse, the United States, in my opinion, has not handled COVID very well. And, lots of countries haven't, and it doesn't excuse that. But, it's clear that there was censorship early on that, slowed the spread of information about COVID.
What are the odds that the actual numbers of COVID cases and death in China are factual? I would argue zero.
I think I have no idea what the actual numbers are.
No one does.
So I don't want to speculate. But yeah, given China's censorship of information it does not like, I would not be surprised if all of the numbers given about the spread were inaccurate.
Yeah, there are some leaked videos from China where you see just police officers grabbing people, locking them up in homes, and just kind of locking them in, like barricading them in. It's hard to see. It's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have much more to say.
I'm glad we agree. What China's a I don't know, it's a fascinating country in a way, I guess. But I think I don't understand why. I mean, I guess I do understand why, but it's a question of why we allow them to do essentially whatever they want, where most other countries would not be able to do this, right? From the Falun Gong and selling organs to wildlife extermination, plagiarism, counterfeit consumer goods, diseases, Uyghurs, human rights, Hong Kong. It list goes on and on and on, and they're just not held accountable. I mean, this virus has crippled the world economically. I don't even know how many people already have died from it. I think in the U.S. 2020, 400,000 people.
Yeah, I think we just hit 400,000, which is just an astounding
amount
number.
Of people. It's a huge amount of people, and they're not held accountable in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a much of a broader political argument about it.
Yeah,
I don't have the answers to deal with economic concerns here. But I can say, from the free expression angle, and this is something that I have been focusing on at FIRE especially, is that China has been making a concerted effort to control the global conversation about, its practices, its policies, human rights violations especially. And, it's something that I think institutions and, especially academic institutions need to be on the lookout for, because, it can be very difficult to, stand up to that pressure to not censor speech that China doesn't like. And, that's something that I've been pressing universities on. You might be pressured to, tell a Chinese activist that they can't come to campus to speak because, they're going to speak about Hong Kong, and you have to stand up against that pressure, because it's unacceptable for, academic institutions to be tolerating pressure from any government. But, and that includes the Chinese government.
What are satellite campuses, and what are some of the issues and ethical questions raised with regards to them?
Sure. So satellite campuses are, for example, the United States, they will have a relationship with the government of another country, and often another university in that country, and they'll say, you have a lot of academic offerings that we would like to have. We would like to expand, put roots in another part of the world. And I think there's a lot of benefit to that. We have a lot to learn from the rest of the world. Information sharing matters a lot. And you can get experiences and education that in some places that you can't get elsewhere. Like you can't do on the ground research unless you're in that country. So I think there are major benefits, but as I like to remind universities, there are pitfalls too. And when you are setting up a campus, which is supposed to be something where academic discussion and debate are open, and they're free from constraints. If you're setting that up in a country that has very serious constraints on speech, there's a very good chance you're going to run into a brick wall there. And you might be offering something that you can't actually deliver. So a good example, I think, is Qatar. So Qatar is a very popular location for satellite campuses and, partnership programs. And over the past couple of years, there have been, as far as I know, 2 American universities who have had kind of censorship blowups that I found pretty troubling. So Georgetown has a campus in Qatar. And a couple of years ago, there was a student and faculty debate scheduled about depicting God as a woman. And that debate caught...
Yeah, they love that.
That debate caught a lot of controversy on social media. People were pretty mad, and they were accusing the school of insulting God, of blaspheming. And eventually the event was shut down. And, Georgetown University has a strong commitment to free expression on its Qatar campus. And so they claim, it was a security issue, and, they didn't actually have proper permissions to hold this event, which is something we hear a lot. After something's been censored, you didn't have the proper permission.
Yeah.
But then they eventually put out a statement that said, the faculty and students are allowed to host events that are in accordance with Qatar's laws. Qatar's laws include a blasphemy law. So, the question is, what are you offering students? Are you offering a campus where they can speak freely and, have discussions about religion? That's a pretty basic thing to do in college, debate religion. Yeah. Or is it a campus that abides by a blasphemy law? At the very least, I think schools owe it to be honest to students about what they're selling. If you're paying all this money to go somewhere and you think you're promised certain rights and then you don't have them when you get there, you might be a little mad. And so, very similarly, last year at Northwestern University in Qatar, they were planning to host an event with some kind of, I think it was a Lebanese rock band, and their lead singer is openly gay. Okay. And so they ended up canceling that because of safety concerns, because, again, people were mad about the event. Yeah. And, I think they recommitted to academic freedom. They said how much free expression matters. But the Qatar Foundation, which is a state-linked nonprofit in Qatar and a partner of Northwestern University's campus, they put out a statement saying that the event was canceled, not because of security concerns, but because it was in violation of Qatar's laws and customs. So, again, the question is, what is your campus offering? And, shouldn't you be telling students, before you come here, you might need to know that, events might have to be canceled because something offensive is going on. Yeah.
There's a, while you were talking, I was thinking of kind of an equivalent here. I don't know when this happened, a couple of years ago maybe, but Ben Shapiro was supposed to talk on some campus, and he literally had to be escorted. And Ben Shapiro's, he's a conservative. He's not some extremist. He's not some, InfoWars type guy. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but he's a super smart, pretty level-headed conservative on majority of the issues. And I don't think he was able to talk. I think they shut him down. There was, gathering of hundreds or thousands of students, and he had to be escorted by police officers because they feared for his safety. And it sounds not that different. Like there it is government, but it's also, I'm sure in Qatar, it's also people like they majority of Muslim countries, if you make fun of God, that's a pretty big no-no. It doesn't matter if it's government or the general population. And it just, this is supposed to be the land where you can have free speech and you can say whatever you want. And it just seems like that's also not happening here as well.
And I think the thing about a point we like to make about free speech, and we just made this point recently in reference to the riots at the Capitol, is that free speech is so important because it gives us a way to settle disputes without having to turn to violence. So free speech is a thing you're supposed to use instead of violence when you disagree with somebody, and so that's what we advocate for. If you don't, like the speaker, protest, hold your own event. There are a lot of different ways to respond to it. Violence is pretty much the one you're not supposed to do.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that someone like Ben Shapiro can go to university and speak his mind because again, like while he's not a liberal, he's a conservative, but he's like a traditional conservative in a way. He's not some far right. He's a Jew. He's not some far right guy. And even him, like just not being able to speak freely on campus.
Yeah, we've had. I'd have to check. I can't remember. We've had a lot of cases over the past
I'm
few
sure.
years, but we've had some cases with Ben Shapiro having speaking issues for sure. Yeah, I've been at Fire for over 8 years now. So
Oh wow.
there's been a lot of cases.
Oh, I'm
a
sure.
lot of stories to remember.
Yeah, you guys probably need to start hiring more people. It seems like it's just going to get more and more busy with time.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We've had the busiest year ever, actually, over the past year. We thought, with a lot of people being, just taking classes from home, that we wouldn't have as many issues because a lot of our cases are, I wanted to hold a protest in the quad and I wasn't allowed. So, a good number of our cases involve in-person speech, but we've had more case submissions than ever. It's been our busiest year ever, and
Wow.
yeah.
Do you think? What do you think overall? Like, are people happy with this Zoom type of class, or are they, eager to go back to the way it was?
I think it might be my personal feelings coming through here. I don't think a lot of people are all that thrilled about it. Yeah, I think it makes it easier for some people. It's if you don't have to travel to a campus, it might make it easier. But I think there is a lot of value in in-person conversation, and I think it's easier to just have some conversations and academic debates in person. And just on a less of a how I feel about it, but there are like just new internet censorship issues that come up in higher ed when you have to do everything online. So like, Zoom, what if Zoom decides they don't want to host something, which has come up. And there was a pretty disturbing report that came out recently about an executive at Zoom who had been taking down calls last June for the Chinese government to censor Tiananmen Square
Really?
memorials. Yeah, and so it's the person is no longer employed there, and so hopefully that won't be an issue going forward. But it's concerning. We have so much of our so many classes and so just so many academic events going on over Zoom, and it's scary to know that someone can have that power to to interfere with academic discussions like that.
Yeah. This is I feel like we're almost living through some sort of a social experiment right now, and but on the other side, I also feel like we're in a post truth era. In a way, I don't I like what is true is so subjective. Like if you have, I don't know, Pizzagate and Jade Helm and Capitol Hill on the right, like we discussed, and then you have, I don't know, free speech, Antifa, anti-vaxxers, whatever it is on the left, and no one can agree on what is a definitive truth, right? Like an objective truth. There's religious social, political bubbles that are happening in all these different echo chambers online. Even, just taking it back a little bit, Qatar, they have AJ Plus, right? That's the news network. It used to be Al Jazeera, right? And then they kind of rebranded and it's AJ Plus.
Mhm.
And they have their own version of things where they give you this type of propaganda. And a lot of people in the US, they look at it as they take it as Bible, like, oh, look, that's a really good cutting edge, they give you the news that maybe CNN or MSNBC or some others won't, or maybe Fox, whatever, won't give you. And just everybody has their own agenda that they're pushing. And I think, most people, they don't have time to sit down and decipher who's behind it, what money is allocated, what the agenda is. They just want news. They just want information. It's extremely difficult,
Yeah, I think it's tough. And, if you're getting your news, on social media or something, it could just be difficult to remember where you read something. And so you
Yeah.
might see, a new, like a correct story alongside a false story. And it's hard to, especially with little time and little expertise, it's difficult to glean what information is true or is not true. And it's also interesting how fundamentally different information people are seeing is. Like, I'm sure if I compared, my newsfeed on Facebook or Twitter to, a friend or a family member's, we would be getting wildly different information. And I think people don't realize, how different our information streams can be.
Yeah.
And then I think the world would be better if people understood a little bit better how social media works and, how this information works.
Yeah. I pretty much altogether stopped following any news outlet. I try to follow people and people that at least in my head, I think are trustworthy and are as unbiased as can be, but we all have some bias, and both on the left and on the right. And I try to get information from people rather than an organization that has ill motivation behind it. And yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's working.
I just get all my information from Gritty, the Flyers mascot.
I just try to get all my friends from Alex Jones, Infowars. I feel like he's the most trustworthy one. He's really passionate about what he says, and
That's all that matters, the passion.
it's all in the passion, man. It's a delivery. It's how you deliver it. So let's talk a little bit about our own institutions here. I think I saw somewhere that last year, I believe it was, or no, sorry, not last year. Since maybe 2012, there's been over $12 billion of foreign investment from hostile and friendly governments into educational institutions in the U.S. Is that correct?
So I'm not sure about the exact numbers. I have to double check on that.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, and right now there's a lot of investigations into what funding has actually been reported versus what hasn't been reported. So I think it's not total clarity on that at the moment. But my position on this is actually pretty similar to my positions on a lot of things. What matters the most is transparency. It's very important to know, what agreements this money is coming under. There were a lot of questions, especially about Confucius Institutes in the United States, because that was
what those are.
Sure. So Confucius Institutes are. There's something that the Chinese government operates. A lot of them have been closed up at this point in the United States. I think there's probably maybe a few dozen left, probably less than 80. But what they are is a university will form a relationship with the Chinese government to host a Confucius Institute. And the point of the Confucius Institute is to teach Chinese culture and language. So it's this idea that the university and the Chinese government will offer or put together money to form this institute. And, professors from China or teachers from China will come over and, offer courses that will just allow people to learn more about, Chinese customs and language. And, there isn't anything inherently wrong with that.
Yeah.
But what matters is, making it public. It's having people know what's in these contracts, because there were accusations at some Confucius Institutes that they were being used to try to encourage censorship at the university. There are some instances of Confucius Institute's employees saying, we are not willing to, host this event about Taiwan, or we don't want you hosting this. It could put the Confucius Institute in jeopardy if the university is doing this. So obviously, that's not acceptable. So, what matters is if a university is going to enter into these agreements, they need to be transparent about it. They need to, let people know what conditions of the money are. And also, just to ensure that, it won't be used to engage in any kind of censorship. That's something I've been, writing about for a few years and trying to encourage universities to look at it. And, it's not a Confucius Institute, but Cornell University, I think, is a really interesting example because I think it was back in 2018, they chose to close their international partnership with a Chinese university because there were reports that students were being surveilled and censored there. And so, they said, we're not willing to, keep up a partnership that has these kinds of pitfalls to it. And so they later put out a set of guidelines saying that, here's our rule for international partnerships. And they said, closing the partnership is on the table if there's a violation of basic principles. And I think, all universities that are engaging in, partnerships, in foreign countries or with foreign governments or, even with the US government, they should have these kinds of principles on the table. And they should say, here's what we are now willing to look past. And this is what we'll do if there is a violation. Because, if you're working in a country where, basic speech rights are violated, you kind of need to account for the fact that it might happen to you or your students, or, even the presence of those laws might be enough to make people self-censor. So, there needs to be accounting for that.
So, okay, so I have two questions. One is, again, I didn't go to school here, but um, you know, going to college, especially like Ivy League type, is very expensive in the U.S. It's what, like quarter of a mil, half a mil. It's anywhere between those numbers.
Yeah. Depending on financial aid, scholarships, it can get very, very expensive. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of money. Why do they need all this additional, you know, money, millions of dollars from all these governments if they're already making, hand over fist? There's so much money coming in. Why do they need this extra money?
I mean, I can't speak for every university's financial situation, and I think a lot of schools have had financial concerns, regardless of how much money they're bringing in. I think regardless, it's a situation where they see it as more funding, more opportunities, so it's very hard to pass that up. I mean,
Yeah.
I can see under the right circumstances why a school would say, this is a good idea, we should go forward with it. And, I don't want to discourage universities from international partnerships because, I don't think it's a good idea to close off universities like that.
And then on the flip side, from from China or Russia or Saudi Arabia, is there like an end goal that they're trying to achieve by putting investments into these institutions?
I mean, I think it helps, their universities too when they have, you know, partnerships around the world, when they have more relationships. I think there can be things gained for both sides of it. I on the perhaps less positive side, there is a possibility that China, for example, might be attempting to interfere with university. It's very clear right now, especially with China's behavior in Hong Kong, that there is a concerted effort to censor global conversations. So I don't want to mind read. I think there are very good reasons to engage in that type of international agreement. But it's possible that governments doing bad things might be doing something for a bad reason. So
Yeah, you wanna believe that it's not all sinister, but there's just a few countries that just seem like they wanna poke the bear, like they wanna really I don't know, change, and we can see that, right? Like with um, Russia, with all the bots that and the election, and just the way it just seems like much easier to infiltrate the conversation nowadays and to switch it all around and make people believe that they're seeing what they're or yeah that they're seeing what they're not seeing or not seeing what they're seeing.
yeah, it's really interesting on that front. We actually learned years ago a professor got in a huge social media firestorm. It was actually at my alma mater, Drexel University, and he ultimately ended up just leaving the school because the situation they put him in, like they won't let him teach in person on campus. It was just an untenable situation. But we learned later on that a lot of the social media firestorm had actually been pushed by Russian bots. So,
Really?
yeah. So it's interesting, especially because I think you know pr- controversies on campus tend to get a lot of national attention. So we have kind of disinformation and bots pushing that and trying to make it more of an issue, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why sometimes I'll see like someone get all like riled up and about some tweet, and then it'll be like, Confucius 07254. I'm like, dude, it's okay. Don't take it too seriously. I don't think that's a real person somewhere sitting in his basement and tweeting that. It's
Yeah, yeah.
probably a warehouse in Russia.
Sometimes I'll get like a really just unhinged tweet, and I'm like, I have to respond to this. I'm like, this person has one follower and has tweeted 60,000 times. I should probably not.
I smell something fishy about this.
Something's amiss here. I should
Yeah.
probably just not look again.
I try, and again, like I don't have this massive following, so I don't have even 1% of what someone with a big following, has. But when I get negative comments, it doesn't matter if it's on Reddit or Twitter or Instagram, I don't respond. I try like my hardest. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I have to, but like, look what they said. Like they're so wrong. I have to correct them, but I don't, because I'm going to have to spend a lot of time trying to convince this person otherwise, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, if I sense someone is, coming at me from good faith or like saying things that I think people might see and believe, and I'm like, no, that's incorrect. I just want to, make that clear. But I try not to just fight with people anymore on the internet because it's kind of it's a black hole that you fall into.
Yeah.
And, I will just say, I think you're wrong. Here's my explanation. Have a nice day. And then I move on and I don't look at it again.
I know you're wrong. Yeah, and it seems like there's certain people that just have a lot of free time. Like they can sometimes I'll get like I like to sometimes I like to be like a contrarian on a popular tweet. Like if someone has a lot of followers, he'll put out a tweet and I'll just put like a something to the contrary. Oh my god, the amount of tweets that people will tweet at you. Sometimes you'll get like someone like one person, like 30, 40. Dude.
It's funny. People like some people build their online, brands that way. Like,
Really?
like the Trump reply guys, where it's like people who will build their brand by replying to like, well, not anymore, but like all of Trump's tweets. And then they
Not
get
anymore,
like
yeah.
30,000 responses. And like people would just build brands doing that alone because when an account has so many followers and you reply, then you're like, look at all these people looking at my tree.
That's so funny you mentioned that. I like, there's a doctor, I think his name is Eugene something. And every time Trump puts out a tweet, like, and I don't follow Trump, but sometimes I would see it just because, he is the president.
You see, you see the tweets.
Yeah, he is the president for now. He would be first. Like, this guy would be first, and I think he built a massive following this year. It's so funny that you said that. I never put that together.
And so, like, they were removed, but like, do you remember the Krasensteins? They were banned for I don't even know what reason. I don't remember anymore. There's too many things, but I'm pretty sure that's how like the Krasenstein brothers built their brand too.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, something to look into, folks. There you go.
If you want to build your brand, become a reply guy.
Yeah, just start tweeting at Joe Biden, and you should be fine in a year or so. What do you think as far as free speech? Are we better today than we were 20 years ago? Not specifically in the U.S., but generally in the world.
That's a tough question. I think internet access gives people a lot more of an ability to speak, a lot more ways and places to say something. But, a lot of people live under very restrictive governments, and it's kind of difficult. It's very difficult, I think, to weigh those two things and see if one has made it, more free or less free compared to the other. But, you look at China, which is, a massive population, and, they don't even have access to Twitter. Yeah. I'm not willing to say, more or less free. I think there are very, very serious threats to free speech right now. And, especially, for example, the national security law in Hong Kong. I think that's kind of a good look at, where things might be going in a bad way. Because, I'm not sure how versed you are on the national security law, for example. But so it was passed in Hong Kong, I think last June. And, there are 4 major offensive. It's like separatism, subversion, collusion with foreign countries, things like that. But it pretty much is just whatever Beijing wants to censor. That's what the law is going to do.
Yeah.
But what's I think a lot of people don't realize about the law is that it applies, according to China, to people who are not residents of Hong Kong. So, if you're, at home and you're tweeting about how you think Hong Kong should be free, and then you go to Hong Kong, you could theoretically be arrested for that, for violating the national security law. And so it's kind of a scary look at, and I am following it very closely just on the academic front, because you have a lot of scholars and students who are very scared of, what they might say in class, especially when everything's online right now. They're very scared of, they might violate the national security law just by discussing Hong Kong in class, and then, where does that put them? Yeah, maybe China won't care enough to bring the hammer down on them, but maybe they will. And like, that's a level of fear, I think, that's pretty alarming. And, it's, I guess, just a global law that China thinks it has. So, I think that's something to be on the lookout for, perhaps the proliferation of, laws like that, where countries are saying, anything you've said, that violates, some vague national security law standard. Bad news if you come here. Or they might even try to get critics, extradited, things like that. So it's, I think it's a pretty scary future for free speech. And, right now, enforcement of the national security law is just, ramping up. So, I think on the question of, are things better? I know I can't say definitively, whether something's better or worse, but, as of right now or 30 years ago, but I know this is quite bad.
Yeah, maybe like a per country thing, right? I know, like, for example, in Russia, like, people who oppose Putin tend to disappear magically. No one can find them And I mean, it's a very big country. I'm sure there's forests filled with dead bodies somewhere, but or maybe not. I don't know. I don't want to presume anything. But what do you think is probably, or at least the top three worst countries right now for free speech and freedom of expression?
You know, China, obviously, North Korea, it's,
Yeah.
quite horrible. I think probably, it depends on the topic. I think, there are some countries that are kind of all around, quite awful on free speech. And then some countries where it's, I think, Saudi Arabia is at the top of the list. I think,
Iran.
Pakistan in terms of, blasphemy and religious expression. There's a lot of contenders.
Why pick one?
Yeah, there's a lot of blame to go around.
Yeah. Well, I know there was a famous story in Iran last year where this Iranian wrestler, Naveed Afkari, he protested the regime and he was executed. And, I'm a huge MMA guy. I love the sport. And a lot of people from the sport, like a lot of top guys, Dana White, who is the head of the UFC as well, he, protested and he reached out to Trump and they try to do something to help this guy, not get executed, and they failed. The regime executed this guy, and it almost seemed like they did it in spite, like because the West thinks that they can tell us what to do, we're going to show that, And I think they made up a story, right, that he killed someone. But he says that under torture, he had to confess.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of confessions under torture.
Yeah, that seems like the way to go there. And it's just when you hear statistics, it's sad. But when you put a face to it, when you see like this guy who's a wrestler, part of the fighting community, it was a really sad story. Yeah, it was. It got, when people talk about how they're oppressed here, I'm like, you're not really oppressed. Like look at the broad picture. Look what's going on in other parts of the world where people are literally getting executed for, opposing the regime. So, there's work to be done in the U.S., but it's still one of the best places for free speech.
I've long felt that our conversation about free speech in the United States could benefit from more awareness about free speech issues abroad. Kind of for two reasons. One, because people think some things are censorship that just aren't. Somebody criticized me. I've been silenced. It's like, no, that's part of free speech, And so, they think, somebody says your opinion's bad. It's like, I have been censored and silenced. Like, no, not quite. But on the flip side of that, for people who think that, free speech is sort of overrated and just doesn't really matter, it's like, I think that's a very privileged viewpoint to think that, free speech doesn't matter, because there are so many people around the world who are horribly mistreated because they chose to speak out. And I think people who, want to overturn, or want to, do away with the First Amendment for whatever reason could, benefit from learning about people who probably really wish they could speak freely or practice their religions freely. So I think for two fronts, it's helpful for people to have a better understanding of, global free speech issues.
Yeah. I think we got to a point here where it became too good, too free, or too rich, or too easy, or whatever it is that you want to say. And people are almost looking for hardships. They're looking to, I have it hard because A, B, C, D. They can't accept that, hey, I have a good life. I have these privileges, that I live in a first world country. I live in the richest country. I have all these opportunities. It's like they have to find something to show that there's some strife, that they went through some troubles, that their life wasn't easy. I don't know. I keep hearing this over and over again, like, it's not easy. It's rough. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, life is hard, generally speaking. Like it shouldn't be it shouldn't be easy all the time. But just, again, if you go to many, many, many other countries in the world, you'll see what real trials and tribulations are when just you don't have basic infrastructure, right? Like just take India, for example, who's the biggest democracy. I think something like 600 million people don't even have access to toilets. Like that's double the population of the US almost, just no access to sanitation, So that just gives a little bit perspective.
Yeah, I think perspective is probably something we all need.
Sarah, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed our conversation.
Where can people find you on the internet? Where are the best places?
So if they want to learn more about FIRE, they can go to thefire.org, THEFIRE. If they want to follow me, which is probably a mistake, they can find me
Definitely follow her.
at Sarah EMCLAUGH. As you can probably understand, there are a lot of Sarah McLaughlins out there. Very difficult to just get my own name in there. So
you're this era's Sarah McLaughlin, the new generation Sarah McLaughlin.
I am just waiting till somebody asks her if she's me. That's all I want. I want it to happen one time. It's a simple request.
I'll have to get her on the podcast at some point just to fulfill that wish.
Ask her how it feels to be the less famous Sarah McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Do that favor.
I mean, I think anyone born after like the year 2000 wouldn't have a clue who she was. Just no idea. I don't think she's been out a song in like 20 years. Like,
teenagers make fun of me for it. So
really?
Although maybe teenagers just bully me. That's possible.
Because I don't know when the last time she put out a song. It must have been a while. It's not in the last decade, probably.
I'm not sure. I hear a lot about the dog commercials, though. The ASPCA commercials that she's in.
Oh, yeah. You definitely cry after watching one of those.
Yeah.
Sarah, again, thanks a lot. I wish you the best of luck with your sports teams. I know it hasn't been the best year.
Yeah, no comment.
No comment. All right. Take care. Thanks again for the podcast. This was a blast. And maybe we'll do it again later this year.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You as well.
Bye.